Hi, I'm Femi. Okay, welcome to the stream. Today we look at Lebanon with a very straightforward question. Can Lebanon recover from its recent economic recession? Not a straightforward answer though, because things to contend with: a coronavirus lockdown, fuel inflation, people going hungry, people having a limited amount of money to spend on basic groceries, and then on top of that, anti-government protests. If you're already joining us on YouTube, you have something to add to this, you have a question for our guests, jump into the YouTube chat and you can be part of this conversation. I want to introduce our guests. They'll be dealing with a lot of your questions and your concerns. Hi there, Kareem. It's good to have you here on the stream. Tell everybody who you are.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm a journalist for The Public Source, and I'm a non-resident fellow at the Tahrir Institute.
Welcome to the stream. Rahaf, good to see you. Tell everybody who you are.
So my name is Rahaf. I've been an active protester since October 17, and I've been participating in organizing different protests over the past 2 years. And sorry, the electricity just went off.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. And Timur, it's good to have you back in the stream. Remind people who you are.
I'm the Al Jazeera online correspondent based in Beirut, basically covering all things Lebanon, from the streets to politics and finance and business.
All right, let's get this conversation started. Timur was on the stream back in October of 2019, and this is how he looked. Have a look here at my laptop. I just took this screen grab from that show. And he looked fresh, he looked optimistic, even a slight smile there, vaguely happy. Protests were happening, you were enthusiastic. How's your mood today, Timur?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was, I think, after a week of sort of exhaustively covering protests on the streets. But as you said, I mean, it was an extremely sort of optimistic moment. And I think it's that was about 6 or 7 months ago. And I think it's worth sort of having a small account of what's happened since. We've gone from that, explosive moment of unity on the streets in Lebanon, really unprecedented, over 1 million people together across the country. Which very quickly, however, was sort of tainted by the economic crisis, people really being pushed to focus on their basic needs. And then, of course, in February, we had our first coronavirus case and went into a lockdown on March 15th. And so it's been an incredible 6 months in this country for everybody here. Normal life has been completely upturned, whether it's protests, economic crisis, or coronavirus, and so today, I mean, we're in a very different place. I'd say a lot of that positivity, a lot of that feeling of we're really going to somewhere, we're going to change. I think today we see that it wasn't really. We haven't gotten to the change that we want yet. If you talk to the people on the streets, that's what they'll tell you.
Mm-hmm. Kareem, I'm going to show you something which I'm sure you've seen already, but for the benefit of our audience, some video that went viral in Lebanon. Have a look here on my laptop. I want you to see who posted it first of all, Abbas Noordin, or one of the people who shared the video. And I just want you to look here. It's a lady and a gentleman. The lady is pregnant. The gentleman and the lady are eating out of a dustbin. And this was circulated widely because in Lebanon, trying to eat and getting food for a big chunk of the population is very, very serious right now. Can you explain why anyone would need to do that in Lebanon today, Karim?
Yeah, I think that this video speaks volumes about the extent of the economic crisis in Lebanon. Lebanon is generally considered to be a middle-income country. And when we reach to a point where food is no longer affordable and that we have a food security crisis on our hands, this really sounds some serious alarm bells. Lebanon imports a lot, and it needs US dollars to do so. But a US dollar shortage has caused an import crisis, which has been going on since October. And the Lebanese government has struggled to resolve it. It's asked the international community, regional countries, European countries, United States and China, if they could help out, and there has been no help whatsoever. And now you factor in the fact that all these borders are closed in because of the COVID-19 outbreak, and things are less accessible. Food prices have skyrocketed. The government has struggled to maintain the extent of the inflation. I've spoken to people who have said that it's gone up by about 60%, and some municipalities, even in Tripoli, which is our second largest city, is distributing coupons for supermarkets so people can buy food. And I remember a government official in the municipal government there said that people were fighting over these coupons. This is a serious concern, which really indicates the extent of our poverty and unemployment. That is only going to get worse, especially in the short term, unless there are significant structural changes to our economy to make sure that they kind of, there's a U-turn for this kind of development.
Rahaf, you are protesting again. You're out on the
Yes.
streets. Coronavirus lockdown, you're out protesting. We've got some pictures of you in the streets. Why? Why are you out again?
I think people just like are fed up with the situation, especially that the government right now is not taking any serious action, whether to face the economic crisis or to even face the corona crisis. The government has proved to be like a huge failure because even right now we're still talking about getting a loan from IMF and increasing the debt as well. So I think people are on the streets saying that the danger of corona is not more serious and is not more painful than the danger of actually starving to death. So this is why we're back on the streets again. Because if we don't die out of corona, we're gonna be dying out of lack access to healthcare, out of not having access to food. We're gonna die by being kicked out of our houses because people are losing their jobs. They are being kicked out because they cannot pay the rent. And still the government is still talking about getting more loans and not actually restructuring the debt or making serious investments in the Lebanese economy to be like more productive and sustainable to really face the crisis better.
Timur, I know you've got something you want to add, but let me go via Carmen Gerhardt, who's Assistant Professor of Public Administration at the American University of Beirut. We're going to play her comment. She spoke to us early on the stream, and then just come off the back of it, Timur.
We're seeing a definite return to the streets, to protest, also to organizing new political platforms in Lebanon, because the structural problems haven't changed since before the COVID outbreak in Lebanon. Corruption, rampant clientelism, and a deteriorating socioeconomic conditions is pushing people to take back to the streets. I think the only hope that Lebanon has is that the revolution continues and is able to institutionalize in new political channels that really can change the existing political elite who have failed since the civil war to make any demands to meet citizens' needs.
Oh my goodness, nodding heads all around.
Yeah.
Timur, you go first.
Yeah, so I think it's very important here to set a few things straight. First of all, we've had a political class that has been in power for 30 years since the end of the Civil War. Over those years, unsustainable policies, mismanagement, and corruption have led us to where we are today. And where are we today? If you're the average Lebanese person today, in the past 6 months, you've seen your salary either completely vanish because you've been laid off, as tens of thousands have been laid off, or your salary has been slashed in half because businesses can't sustain the same level of employment. What does that mean? If you have half a salary today, you would think that's pretty bad, right? But the currency has also depreciated by 60%. Half salary, say $50 on $100, and effectively today it's worth about $20. And that salary to the store, things have increased in price by 30 to 50%. So it's a complete nightmare scenario, and there's no social safety net because for years the Lebanese state has been hollowed out. There's no healthcare, there's no unemployment compensation. People used to get aid, through loyalty to parties, but even parties today are struggling to do that. And so now that has very real effects. The murder has gone up by over 100% in the first 4 months of this year. Thefts of cars and other burglaries are between 20 and 50% up in the first 4 months. And basically, the point is that the new government that has come into power has shown over the past 3 or 4 months that it is unable to take independent technocratic decisions, even though it calls itself an independent technocratic government. Because time and time again, we see whether it be the independence of the judiciary, whether it be capital controls, whether it be very simple things, they are pulled away from the cabinet's table by the 5 or 6 men. That is why this new government is being called Hukumat al-Wajha, the facade government, basically the government, the front government, as in a front for political parties. For economics to improve, politics must change. And that's what you're hearing on the street today.
See, but Rahaf, this is the government that promised so much. This is the government that came on the back of the October Revolution. I'm also looking at you out here in the streets. look at Rahaf protesting here. This is coronavirus pandemic. You have a lockdown and you are here. Look at, you've got the masks on. Some people got masks on. You are not social distancing, but you said this is so important that you're willing to risk your health and the health of others.
Yes, because one, the government was definitely using the lockdown and our inability to move actually to pass some laws and to do to interrogate activists, to do raids over the house of activists and jail them. There have been torturing of different activists as well. So this is not something that we should let go. And this picture, actually, it was day after the killing of Fawaz, who was a martyr who was killed by the army in Tripoli because they were protesting against the deteriorating economic situation. So when we have someone who is killed by live bullet by the army on purpose, of course, we're not going to say that we're afraid of our health. Of course, many people are, but it's really either we die out of hunger or we die out of just like not taking the right in our hand. And not to also mention that the banks kept just like going on with their measures that are humiliating for the people who have deposits in the bank. We don't have access to our money. We don't have access to our to anything that we've been working on. We don't have access to our salaries. We don't have access to dollars anymore. So people were attacking the banks. They were burning them down. So of course, we're going to be in the streets because the increasing violence, even of this technocrat government that we do not believe in, this technocrat government just believe that they are a military rule at the end because they have destroyed the tents of the protesters. As you can see right now, they have been attacking. So being on the streets, no matter what, is important reminder that the revolution is going on. Whether now or later, we're not going to stop.
Karim, what is the current administration doing to try and get out of their economic recession, knowing that the coronavirus pandemic is happening, knowing lots of people can't work, no safety net for people who are extremely vulnerable? What are you seeing where you're saying, oh, I see what they're doing here. They've got a financial strategy.
So when Prime Minister Hassan Diab's cabinet, first came to be, they presented, sort of a policy statement where they paid a lot of lip service to the uprising in Lebanon, to the different protesters and their demands. At the moment, they're currently negotiating with the IMF. They have requested $10 billion over the next 5 years to save the economy. And they have sort of promised significant economic restructuring. They have come up with an economic rescue plan, which includes a restructuring of almost everything one could think of, from restructuring the banks even to the electricity sector, to implement a whole new wide range of taxes and even anti-corruption legislation. Of course, the question is that, can they deliver on these promises, and what is this legislation and what do these reforms look like as well? At the moment, there seems to be a bit of a tense relationship right now between Lebanon and the IMF and how these negotiations are going. But Lebanon is also really relying on a pledged $11.1 billion in loans from the international community, which they hope can be used to rebuild its entire infrastructure, from highways and sewage treatment plants, power plants, and the like. So Lebanon is heavily relying on international support for it. Their economic rescue plan is, rather ambitious. Whether they can, whether the same political parties that got the country into this mess can actually implement all these reforms, which in a way would harm them, is obviously very questionable. And of course, the banks are not happy with this, this economic plan at all. The banks want the government to bail them out. The banks have called on the government to sell state assets to help them recover, because the banks are struggling to maintain themselves.
Have this tweet coming in from Samaya. What do the guests think of the claims that an IMF or World Bank bailout would be a neo-imperialist band-aid solution?
Well, I mean, I could just say that what really matters is the reforms that the Lebanese government does in order to get this aid. We had a donor conference 2 years ago in Paris, France, where the international community pledged $11 billion. And they said, if you guys, fight corruption, if you do some judicial reform, if you give us transparent public procurement processes, then we can actually give this money to you. And some of those reforms are really very connected to what the average Lebanese person wants. They want corruption to be fought. They want public tenders to be carried out transparently. They want judicial reform. They want structural reform. And so I think that, the Lebanese state and the Lebanese people could benefit a lot from the conditions of certain kinds of aid. Now, there is also the issue of, the IMF, traditionally asks for the value-added tax or sort of ending, which I think not go with the average.
Timo, I'm just going to jump away from you.
Crisis is, you're talking
Timo,
about.
you're breaking up a little bit, so I'm just going to jump into YouTube for the moment so that we can just reestablish that audio link with you. Some cynicism on YouTube, Kareem. Kevin Neo said that no one should count on the government if they desire freedom. Twilight 15 again on YouTube. Getting debt to pay more debt. That seems logical. Lol. Lots of cynicism there. Kareem?
That cynicism is completely warranted. At the end of the day, no matter what sweeping reforms, no matter how positive or negative they may be from the ruling political parties of business magnates and ex-warlords and so on, right? No matter how positive or negative these reforms could be, the question is, could you implement anti-corruption measures or judicial reform on yourselves, right? The idea is that these are people that have profited from corruption and mismanagement of public funds. They have benefited from these really messy policies. So are these the people to legislate and implement in an effective way these kinds of reforms to ensure that the Lebanese economy becomes viable again? So it completely makes sense that there's a lack of trust in this government. And as Timur said earlier, it is treated as a facade government. Many of these ministers, or most of them, were not involved in government at all before, but they were appointed by the political parties in the first place. And there are power structures outside of cabinet and parliament in Lebanon of people who call the shots. They might be ex-politicians or ex-warlords or business magnates that have quite a big say in how things are run in Lebanon. So if you take this into consideration, the cynicism is absolutely warranted.
Mm-hmm. So while we're discussing this in terms of the financial strategy of the government in Lebanon, there is no safety net for people who are at the very bottom of even having any kind of income. For instance, domestic workers. Let me show you here a story that the AJ Plus, our team, did. This is an all-female group of domestic workers who are on a mission to deliver food to fellow domestic workers in need during the coronavirus pandemic in Lebanon. People are doing their own social services for each other. I want to introduce you to Banshee, who is actually in this video, and she explains how she is helping other people who really need help, particularly domestic workers. Let's have a look.
Inyalinya Besedet organization has been assisting domestic workers the past 3 years in Lebanon. But now, because of the coronavirus and the financial crisis, thousands of domestic workers have laid off, or many are forced to work for free, and many unable to return to their country, and have not received any help from their embassy. Because of this, Inyalinya Besedet set up GoFundMe, and we are providing food for thousands of domestic workers in Lebanon.
Rahaf, the president actually said very recently that he was afraid that people were going to starve, that they may not even be bread for them to buy. What are you hearing? What are you seeing on the streets?
So when we say that people are starving, we tend to forget that we're not talking only about Lebanese people. When we talk about people who live in Lebanon, we're talking about Syrian refugees, about Palestinian refugees. We're talking about migrant workers and migrant domestic workers, and they are the most marginalized group, and they are the most affected by the crisis right now. So it happens that I'm working with the Migrant Community Center. So I'm in contact with many migrant workers, and we've seen tens of eviction threats every single day of people who are kicked out of the house. There are thousands of people who don't have access to food for days as well, and they're counting on initiatives. And what's even shocking is that when the crisis started, the government, of course, did not do anything for the people. Lebanese people started doing initiatives, but to support, to collect money and to support Lebanese families as well. But what was shocking is that even these initiatives refused to support migrant workers because they wanted to prioritize Lebanese first. And this is what led Banshi and her group, that are an amazing group, to actually do their own initiatives for the thousand. Like in Lebanon, there are more than 250,000 migrant domestic workers at least. So this is what we mean. I just want to jump back to the idea, to the economic plan, and to say that it's not just like a problem of a debt, like getting a debt to pay a debt. It's more than that. I think we now know that it's more like a class struggle, and that we have a huge fight to really change the economic system, and we have a fight against the banks that are in conspiracy with the government as well. So when you have 1% of the Lebanese who hold more than half of the deposits of all the deposits in the bank, it really shows you that any debt from the IMF is actually the weight and the bear of the losses that and the corruption and the bad management for the past 30 years will be on all marginalized and on the working class as well.
I want to bring in Leah into this conversation. We spoke to her earlier, and she said, "Do you know what? It's just time to rethink how Lebanon works." Let's have a listen to her.
What we should do, we should reimagine Lebanon, reimagine a country, an economy that does not rest on the exploitation of informal workers, of migrant workers, and reimagine a just, a fair society. We have reached a point where the injustice is just no longer bearable.
Timur, I remember a day when you were an optimist, smiling, happy. Can you reimagine Lebanon?
Well, I think that's sort of the fight today. If you talk to protesters, you talk to people involved in this, you talk to opposition politicians. The fight today is what kind of Lebanon comes out of this crisis, because crises do, for all of their horror, present opportunities. And so will Lebanon be a more accountable, more just, less corrupt, more inclusive, less sectarian state at the other end of this economic crisis? Or will we continue as sort of a zombie state where we have these, parties in power who continue to divide spoils among each other in the name of power sharing? And we have increased instability, lack of security, isolation, inequality, and emigration. I think that there's there was a point a few weeks ago at a protest in Tripoli, which kind of stuck in my mind, where there was actually a protester in Tripoli who was killed by the army during a protest there, very sort of angry protests. And that protester was then basically, a march was organized in Tripoli to his family's home. And so people came up to Tripoli from across the country. They marched to outside the home. And in this alleyway outside his home, you basically had pictures of all of these dead men, these martyrs who had died in successive rounds of fighting over the years in the country, basically, fighting for this or that warlord's interests. And so my question that came to mind there was, did this person, Fawaz Simman, die for a new cause, a new Lebanon? And I think that's what most people would hope, that the people who have sacrificed so much over the past 6 months and who will be sacrificing in the future as this country continues to collapse, that they are actually sacrificing for a better country and for more accountability and for a Lebanon that really reflects what people took to the streets for 6 months ago.
Timur, Karim, Rahaf, thank you so much for talking to us about Lebanon's economic crisis right now and what you feel is the cause behind that and who we should be concerned about. We really appreciate you being on the stream today. YouTubers, thank you for your comments. Thank you for being part of the program. I'm going to wrap up this conversation on Lebanon, but I want to show you here what we often do Sunday through Wednesday at 16:30 GMT. We take you behind the scenes of the AJ stream, of AJ English, and also TV. So you can join us there 16:30 GMT, Sunday through Wednesday. See you on Instagram Live. See you next time. Thanks for watching. Take care, everybody.